Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. I am your host, Brian Thomas Kropp, and I believe that stories have a tremendous power for good, and so I write them, and I enjoy sharing them with you. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. The way the show rolls is in just a little bit, you'll get to hear a chapter from a book that I have written. I write fiction stories of a variety of genres, and on the other side of that chapter, we'll get into a little bit of some behind the scenes of why did I write the chapter, or how does one go about writing books and those kinds of things. So if you're into all of those behind the scenes kinds of discussions, that is sort of the heart behind this podcast. To let you hear a little story from me, and then kind of what the nuts and bolts of what goes in to the writing of a story or a work of art, that kind of thing. The story that we are in right now is called Shell Game, and it is a crime noir story. And so far, where we are in the story is we've kind of been laying out the storylines that will be part of the whole book and of interest throughout the book. So one of them, we've got a character given, it's a good crime noir. So we have this lady who comes in with a problem to a private detective, and they are set up to help her. The private detective, the main one, is Evan Gold. He has got a partner named Gabe Silver. Her name is Molly Brandt, and they're trying to find her missing father. And then Evan has also this, he's a little bored at the moment and goes to a flea market where he haggles and buys this flour sack full of necklaces and jewelry that is probably very cheap. But in there is a treasure that has yet to be revealed in the story that will play out in the story. And then in this particular chapter, we hit the next storyline. So you are coming in at a good spot as we have just started the story, and you haven't missed a whole lot, as my mom used to say when I would show up late into the living room to watch a rented VHS movie. You haven't missed anything, which is, I'm sure, every screenwriter's favorite comment. Anyway, we will get into Chapter 5 of Shell Game right after we hear from this week's sponsors. Chapter 5. Evan arrived back at his office, looked over his shoulder one more time before fishing his keys from his pants pocket and slipped the key in the lock. He then pulled open the glass door painted with Silver and Gold Detective Agency in golden block letters with a broad black outline. He had long since stopped finding it funny that somehow he had let himself go into business with a man named Silver, let alone gave him top billing. He was glad to see Sophie had already packed it in. It was well after 5 o'clock, and she worked too many hours as it was, certainly more than he was able to pay for anyway. Good thing for him that her loyalty seemed to be ironclad. He knew he would never find a secretary half as good as Sophie if he searched for 50 years. If he burned a bridge with her and Sophie left, Evan calculated he might as well lock up shop and ride off into the sunset. She was one of the good guys. As he approached his office door, he stopped short. The door was ajar. His eyes darted for anything else out of place. It was a well-established practice that the last one out made sure all the doors were closed and locked. He remembered locking his door before he left, which meant only one thing. A pit opened in his gut. He'd feared this moment for the better part of a month. Now that it was happening, he didn't know what to do. Drawing a deep breath, he placed his hand on the door's lock style and pushed it open. There, framed by the setting sunlight in his window, was the outline of a slenderly curved woman. She stood there, observing the activity shuffling back and forth along Commercial. Evan admired her statuesque stance, beautiful and aloof, adorned in mahogany hair cascading down her back in waves. Evan scuffed his feet on the floor, and she turned. Her eyes were tired, but still looked like sparkling emeralds. "Evan," the woman said evenly. Evan hadn't known what to say to his wife since she'd asked him for the separation. Even then, his heart both leaped for joy and cowered in fear. "Catherine," he said, flipping on the overhead light and trying to keep his emotions even, "as I live and breathe." Evan took a couple of steps closer, but was careful to keep his desk between them. "What brings you here?" he asked, and he set the flour sack of potential treasure on his desk. "I'm sorry to bother you at work," she said. "I know how busy you are." She spat the word busy, which reminded Evan of the disdain with which she viewed his occupation. "I need you to sign something." Evan braced himself for what he feared was coming. "What is it?" "Oh, nothing. I'm opening a bank account, and the helpful banker said that since I'm married, I need your signature to open it." "Why are you opening an account?" Evan asked. "You already have access to our money." "Yes, well," she waved her hand and finally sat down. "That's your money. I want my own. Besides, when I checked the balance this afternoon, it seemed you don't have any." "You have a job, then?" "Not yet, but I'm very close to one." She twirled the end of a lock of hair. "I hate to bother you, especially over something boring like this, but as they say, rules are rules." Evan found this last statement grotesquely funny, since she would still be living with him if rules were rules. His marriage to Catherine had been strained almost from the beginning. There was a need in her that he just couldn't seem to meet. Something told her that she was unworthy to be loved. Maybe it was a hurt deep within her that he couldn't ferret out. Whatever it was, he had not yet earned the right to peek behind that wall. "So will you?" she asked. "I promise if you do, you'll see much less of me and go about your business as you please without having to worry or keep up with me." "I enjoy worrying about you." She tilted her forehead down and looked through her eyebrows at him. "Let's face it, we're no good together. Maybe, I don't know. It's just the odd hours, and my suspicions get the best of me. I get jealous. And lonely. You really can't blame me too much, can you, Evan? I mean, you're out at all times of the day and night. Who knows where you go and what you do and who you do it with? And you've told me you can't tell me, and it plagues my mind. I don't know if I should be mad, jealous, worried. If you'd let me in a little, maybe. I don't know." "And I told you I'm working on it. Don't get so worked up," Evan said, resisting the urge to place a hand on her shoulder. "For crying out loud, a man's got to work. Why does this job, something I'm good at, cause you so much grief? It's not like this was a surprise when we got married." I know. She waved off. "I'm a mess." "I didn't say that," Evan said. "Didn't you?" "Listen," Evan smiled curtly. "There's nothing I would enjoy more than having a jousting match with you. But you haven't got time for me," Catherine said. "I understand." She turned back to look out the window. Evan sighed loudly. "Which bank?" "You really should get these windows taken care of." "Which bank?" "Capital Federal. I'll see if I can get over there tomorrow." Catherine nodded, and Evan went to his door to let Catherine out. Evan couldn't bring himself to turn the knob. He stopped and looked at Catherine. "I've been thinking about what you said. A lot. I want to make you happy, and I want this to work, but the business is not doing well. I'm busy because I'm trying to provide for you. But the job is the job. I'm sorry. People's lives don't follow a 9-to-5 schedule." "I get all that," Catherine said. "But even if you told me what was going on occasionally. Look, my father was a fun-loving, charming man, but then 4 years of fighting in the French wilderness changed him. He's not the same man my mother married. He's distant, cold. I can tell he's hurting, but he insists on carrying it all on his shoulders. You know, be a man, and I think it's killing him." She looked into Evan's eyes. "I don't want that kind of marriage. I can't have that kind of marriage." Evan looked back into Catherine's green eyes. "How about this? I wrap up the case I have on the books. Trust me, there aren't that many. And when they are buttoned up in, say, a week, I'll pay my bills, shutter the business, and walk away." "Evan, I don't want you to give up what you love. I love you, Catherine. This is just a job. It's something I enjoy, but it's just a job." Catherine looked away and thought a moment, and then turned back to Evan. Okay. 1 week, close the place down, we start over." Evan smiled. "I don't love this plan," Catherine warned, "but it's a start. Maybe we could go into business together." "Is that a thing people do?" Evan asked. Yes, I'm almost certain husbands and wives have worked together for thousands of years. It's how family businesses became a thing. But not private detectives. Catherine shrugged. Who knows? After a week, who knows? In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd sign those papers with the bank. I'll see if I can get over there tomorrow, Evan said. It'll be a long week if you don't, Catherine said. By the way, what's in the sack? That's an awful big dinner. Flea market, Evan said, looking back at the flour sack. More buried treasure, she mused. Something like that. I'm sure it will take your mind off things. That's the plan, Evan said. Catherine looked at him. Are you sure you want to do this? You could do better than me, Evan Gold. Maybe someone with more adventure. I didn't sign up for better than you. I signed up for you. Win, lose, or draw. Catherine looked again at her husband. Her face had softened quite a bit. I really shouldn't have bothered you. Sophie said you'd be right back, and she let me stay here. You're not a bother, Evan said. Yes, I am. At least that's what I tried to be. She placed her hand on his lapel. You'll go by the bank? Evan nodded. Catherine Gold turned and walked out of the office. Evan smoothed back his hair, let out a long breath, and stepped to his desk. There, waiting for him, was the flour sack full of the necklaces and other whatnot. Evan didn't have it in him to mess with all of that now that he'd run into Catherine. He decided he would have plenty of time to look through it all later and place the sack in his safe hidden in his lower desk drawer. After locking up the merchandise, he turned and stared for a long minute out of his office window. 1 week. Could he walk away from all this in 1 week? Evan's mind raced with the number of details he would need to put a bow on. The thought struck him how he was going to explain this arrangement to Sophie and Gabe. Evan knocked twice on the top of his desk before locking up the office and heading back to his apartment to grab some shut-eye before Gabe reported in. Many, many weeks ago, I was talking about the process of writing this particular book, and there was a moment in the writing of Shell Game where the whole thing was written. I think I had given it a couple of editing passes and had handed it out to a few readers in the biz. It's called beta readers. I'm not exactly sure why, but I don't know. I guess I'm the alpha reader, and then I hand it to other people and they become beta readers. Anyway, just useful way to get some feedback before you launch the book out into the world officially. And some of the feedback came back that essentially they didn't like Evan Gold. And that's a problem because Evan Gold is sort of the spine of the whole book. Much like we will hear him commented about throughout the story, that he is kind of cold, that he's disengaged, and those kinds of things. I had written Evan initially as kind of like a James Bond, old school private detective, kind of very hard-edged. And I remember watching, those kinds of movies and like, oh, that guy is so cool. And so when I'm writing that, I'm like, well, there's a type of detective, or I should say a detective type in fiction, and we'll just play to that. And when I laid that out, I don't know if sensitivities have changed or times have changed, or because I'm writing it versus someone else writing it. I don't know what all the things were, but that was a problem for several people who read it, or I just did it wrong. That's also a possibility. And one of the things was his relationship with his wife. It just didn't seem like a believable relationship and how they dealt with one another. So several of the rewrites in the next set of drafts were around Evan's relationship with Catherine. And so I was re-listening to this chapter, and I don't remember a lot of the Easter egg kind of things. It was a matter of, let me go back into some of the failed romantic relationships of my life, and let me try to remember why those things went badly and what may have been helpful to reconcile them and those kinds of things. And so I sort of built a new relationship between Evan and Catherine out of that. And one of those is, I think they're sort of like, they both want the same thing. They both want to get behind the veneer of the other one and be allowed in. So, Evan is saying, there's something within Catherine that just either she doesn't want to let him in, or he can't figure out how to get behind whatever it is that longs to be loved. And then what she says to him is essentially the same thing. If you would just let me in, they're just like passing, they're just not listening to one another, essentially. And I've been thankfully not currently, I've been married to my wife now for almost 21 years, and it's been a delight. But in the past, so this is going to be like high school, college, that kind of thing. Relationships where it was probably a lot that way, where I think the problem is the other person and they may think the problem is me, but it's the same problem. And if we would just talk about the problem instead of blaming the other person, we might be able to get past some things and have a better friendship or a better relationship. And as a day job, I'm a pastor at a church in Fort Worth, Texas, and there are any number of marriages and other relationships that you run into. Ministry is, quote unquote, in the business of people, and just people get crossways with one another, and it is a common thing, particularly within marriages, for say the husband to adopt the role of husband and the wife to adopt the role of wife. And that means some things as they define what those roles mean, and they act in those roles without really talking about, there was this person that I married and I love them and I was sane when I got married to them. Let me talk to that person again, instead of, I now need to talk to this role, or I need to act in such a way that I am this role, and that means some things. And my hope for Evan and Catherine is that they're able to get past living in roles and actually get back to loving one another and talking to one another. We'll see if that happens over the course of time. But I think, except for the fact that next chapter, we more fully get into what I'm about to tell you. We've now laid in all of the plot lines for the story, more or less. There may be sub plot points, but I think in a long form TV show, like let's say it's an hour-long episode, there are usually 3 plot lines. There's a major plot line that is introduced early. There is a secondary one that is either playing out with some of the minor characters, or is somehow a mirror thematically to the A plot. They call this the B plot. And then there's possibly, depending on the show, a C plot, and that C plot is either going to be straight comic relief, or it'll be something that carries throughout the whole season. So they just get little tastes along the way. That is not how these 3 plot lines work in this book, but that is how you'd commonly find that in a TV show. So in this one, the main driver, which gets better expressed in the next chapter, but it's this whole thing of Molly Brandt and what's going on with her, that's going to drive the main action of the story. So that is plot A. Plot B is whatever the contents of that flour sack is, that is going to drive a secondary plot line. And that is, whatever that is, just so you know, whatever that is going to be more like the TV series C plot. So that is part of the whole 3-book saga that we're working with. And then there's this third thing, which is what's going to happen with Evan and Catherine's marriage. So which does, as I'm working on book 3 currently of the series, that has a minor part in the 3rd book. I don't know. Maybe I'll give it to my beta readers and they'll hate it. It's always a possibility. But that's sort of a little bit about what was going on in chapter 5 and why their relationship is written the way that it is. And I do think, in all honesty, that the feedback I got back from the beta readers really did help the story. It helped my heart go out to Evan a little bit more and help, I think, write a more sympathetic or empathetic protagonist. So thank you if you were one of those people who read that and gave me some feedback. I really do appreciate it and think it helped things. But that is it for Chapter 5 of Shell Game. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you did, go to the places and leave the reviews and the stars and the things and the likes and all of the happiness. That would be much appreciated. A word from you to a friend about the podcast usually can go a long way for them picking it up and maybe enjoying it for themselves. If you are new to the podcast, swing over to brianthomascrop.com, and if you give me your email address, I will send you some stories. And through that, you can also learn about new releases and those kinds of things. But between now and then, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you back here next time.